Your journey has been an interesting one up to here. You've questioned so much more than those around you. You've even questioned yourself as to how you could have grown into these thoughts. Am I crazy? When did I begin to think differently? Why do people in general appear so limited in their thought process? Rest assured, you are not alone. The world is slowly waking up to what you already know inside, yet can't quite verbalize. Welcome to the Spiritual Dope Podcast, the show that answers the questions you never even knew to ask, but needed the answers to. Questions about you, this world, the people in it. Most importantly, how do I proceed now moving forward? We don't claim to have all the answers, but we sure do love living in the question. Time for another hit of Spiritual Dope with your host, Brandon Henley. Let's get right into today's episode.
Hey there, Spiritual Dope. It's Brandon Hanley here, and I have got the first recording of 2022. Congratulations on making that one. Do you go by D, Neil? Or what do you go by, Neil?
I go by Neil, but so it's D, Neil Elliott, and the D is to differentiate me on the internet and as an author. Got
it. Sorry. So I'm on here with Neil Elliott. He's written a book called A Higher Road, Cleanse Your Consciousness to Transcend the Ego and Ascend Spirituality. Neil Elliott found himself depressed, anxious, and fearful. He felt trapped. There was no way out. Searching desperately for a sliver of hope, a reason to keep going, he found a higher road. More accurately, it found him. And as he traveled that road, he discovered a 7-step process that transformed his life. Elliott's book, A Higher Road, Cleanse Your Consciousness to Transcend the Ego and Ascend Spirituality, Spiritually, was born. Neil, thanks for being on today.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here today, Brandon. Thank you so much.
Yeah, awesome. So I'd like to start these off with the idea that you and I, we're energy, right? And that we are just constantly connected to the universe as source, and it's constantly flowing through us, and that somebody's listening to this podcast today, they're going to hear a totally different conversation than you and I are having. You and I are going to have our conversation. The person who's tuning in is going to hear whatever it is that they hear. And that's going to be a message that's coming from you that can only be delivered through you on this podcast to them. What is that message today?
Okay, well, that's excellent. And I would agree with you on that. And we'll see how this is received by folks. And I'm hoping it's received well.
Awesome. What would you think, like, if there was a certain message that's coming through to you through you today, what would that message be?
Oh, it would be that, we are love, and at the core of our being, our souls are all unified in divine consciousness. And no matter how you're feeling and where you're at, whether you're ill or healthy, happy or depressed, live on the street or live in, the most posh mansion available, imaginable, you can transform your life to an inner state of love, peace, joy, abundance, and prosperity, no matter how you're feeling today, whether you're deeply depressed or whether, you're in a more of a stable state.
I love that. And it was listening to, Sadhguru recently. And I think the question came up that was posed to him was, I agree with you, right? I agree with you. It's a challenge when I guess somebody's in a poverty state to get into that space. So how do you what's your approach when somebody's in a poverty state to share this message?
Well, I'll tell you what, I think what I should do is share a little bit about the structure of my book. And with that will come my suggestion for what somebody can do. And it'll be, I'll share a little bit of my story, which kind of gives them some perspective of that. So
spoken like an engineer, Neil.
Yeah, right. Professional engineer. So that's exactly right. So my book, I've constructed my book in 5 parts. And the first part is an overview of what you're going to learn. And the second part is a memoir. And in that memoir, I share how I drove myself through. We, each of us, create our every tomorrow and every event that comes into our lives. And I share the consciousness that I had for my lifetime up until 57 years old, 58 years old, how I chose to think thoughts that I thought and had beliefs that I believed that drove me to the state of deep depression that comes on very slowly, and despondent, and it took me to the brink of suicide. And crafting a suicide note, that's kind of the point I was at. I'd just come across some information about a week prior to crafting that note, and I was planning my suicide out. So I wanted to make sure my wife would be okay and financially stable and everything was going to be good. And I wanted to say goodbye to my family, before I committed that act. So I was planning that out. And, but this information I came across promised to liberate me from my thinking. And I thought, well, so I planned my suicide out. I thought, okay, I'll put that aside. I will last ditch effort. I'll read this and see whether it makes any difference. And a year later, my consciousness was entirely transformed. I was full of inner peace, love, joy. I felt totally abundant and prosperous. And then I've gone through a process, and I'm not quite done yet, but I've gone through a process of just downsizing and get rid of all the things that, I don't need, but other people can use. So really just the less I have, the happier I am. And the next part of my book, what I want to do is go through my book bridges the gap between spirituality and science. That's the focus of my book. And through this method, we talk about consciousness and we talk about science, and we really stretch people and we get people all on the same page in this section of the book about what consciousness really is. I then introduced them to a woman who had a near-death experience that really expanded and stretched my concept of consciousness and gave me a new perspective of it. And then I share this blueprint information that I utilized and that I followed, and it really does this final bridge between science and spirituality. And then in the final chapter of my book, or the final part of my book, I share my personal experience as I went through these 7 steps. And the impetus for writing the book was that because a year later I had totally transformed how I thought and really opened myself up to the divine and connection with the divine, and we'll talk about that a little bit, I wanted to share this with everybody. Because regardless of where you are, whether you're living on the street or you're in a poverty situation, or whether you're in a mansion and you're wealthy, the inner state of a person, you can never truly judge accurately the inner state of another human being. We're all actors in our environment. We all typically put our best foot forward, especially to clients or family and friends. And we hide how we're really feeling and what we're really thinking. And we all know this. You have a thought, but you'll still be polite with, whoever you're speaking with, or kind with whoever you're speaking with. So that's our outward action. But really what matters is what we think and how we feel. And so if you are in a state of poverty, and I know that, money is good because money helps us pay our bills and make sure we have food and everything, and the basics necessary in life. But if you can understand the mechanisms and the processes based in science that bridge this gap, you can slowly change your consciousness to one where abundance and prosperity will come into your life, and you'll slowly get yourself out of that situation of poverty. So that, I hope, answers your question around this state. And it really is a state of, you have to be open to this information. You have to come to it like a little child, full of wonder, full of joy, and no prejudgments. And if you can do that, and if you can understand it, you can transform your life.
I get it, right? There's quite a bit in there to unpack. I definitely love the idea. I love the idea that we're all actors in our environment, and obviously, right, we can rarely tell all of what's going on in the inner state of somebody else, right? We think we may have good gauges on body language. We may feel like we can pick up vibes and all that stuff. But look, how much can we really know? I love that, you know, you build out the book for me here. The bridging the gap between spirituality and science. And I think when you do that, you begin to tear away somebody's filters, right? That they're thinking of it's all woo woo. It's all woo to me, Neil. I mean, you know, how can you, I need to see this work. I need some science. Where's the science from this? I need something tangible. So I'd love to hear what some of your examples are of, you know, bridging that gap and helping somebody to apply some of this in a practical sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so first, let's talk a little bit about consciousness. So I'll tell you what I used to believe. What I used to believe is that everything that came to me as a thought, or I had a thought in my brain, I thought it was all in my brain, and it was something that I had either been exposed to, or learned, or educated, or experienced. And my concept of consciousness now is entirely different. Consciousness is not only within us, but it is all around us. And I look at consciousness now as, when I'm thinking about what I'm thinking about, I see it as more of a stream of things that are going by. And we do this in a nanosecond. We can pick something out of that stream. We examine it. We decide whether or not we like it. If we like it, we think about it, we dwell on it, we mull it over. If we don't like it, we just reject it, throw it back in the stream, and away it goes. And when you can actually get the concept of consciousness like that, it can take you to this next step. And this next step is really trying to understand and come to this understanding. And I offer some books for people to consider reading in my book as well, In a Higher Road. And the first one is around mind and memes. And what this material taught me was that everything that I think as right or wrong, true or false, good or bad, is really just a belief.
Neil, real quick, between mind and memes?
Mind and memes.
Like the memes that everybody posts?
Yeah, memes, everything's a meme. It depends on your definition of a meme, but a meme is a piece of information that we think about and construct, and we see this now. Memes are prevalent on the internet, and what we expose ourselves to is what we think about and dwell on. So an example of this is, if you're reading a murder mystery at night, or you watch a pretty horrific and violent film. And, if you're reading something, it's reinforced by graphic information. So if you watch a film, it's even more graphical, and it tends to stick a little bit more. Or if you're worried a lot about things at work, for example, or something in your life, you typically have restless nights, or at least I had restless nights. I'd wake up and I would worry about things that I saw. And if I saw a graphic film, or was reading deeply involved in a murder mystery or something, that would influence my dreams. And I'd wake up in the night and I'd be thinking about it. So all the things that we expose ourselves to, and all of the memes that we, see on the internet or in other areas, are things that influence what we think about. And we tend to attract to us, in terms of what we visually like and are normally thinking about, we tend to like those kinds of memes. So we, stick with them, we read them, and all of that stuff is influencing what we individually think and collectively what we think. And this becomes important, and we'll talk a little bit about it. And we'll talk a little bit about blueprints of consciousness. So,
just real quick, if you don't mind to jump in real quick here, are you familiar with Neville Goddard?
Yes.
So, I mean, he
Yeah.
tells a story real similar to this, right? Where he talks about the ducks that, if you feed them fish all week long, they're going to taste like fish, right? And his dad would say, 3 days before he wanted duck on the weekend, he'd say, feed it corn and sour milk and all the things that you wanted it to taste like, right? So it's real similar here. So it's kind of what we put in our mind, what we feed ourselves is what's really going to come out and influence the flavor of our mind, I guess, in this scenario. But it's exactly what he was talking about. It's like, what you put into it is what's going to come out of it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's what pervades your thinking. So, just as a diet of all of the vitriolic outrage and, political dissension and arguments and, the horrific things we see on the news all the time or read in newspapers about all the tragedies that are happening in the world. Individually, we're thinking about it because we're reading about it. Collectively, we're thinking about it. And collectively, what we're doing is we're influencing the consciousness of the world. And we're attracting to us things that we think about. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more. So first is to understand this effect of that everything you think is really just a belief, and to really truly get to know that internally. Just because you think it's good, just because you think it's right, just because you've learned it, doesn't mean it's right, doesn't mean it's correct. It is just a belief. You just believe that to be true. And so this book that I offer for people to read, I reference in my material or in my book, In a Higher Road, is, if you want to read it, you understand it, you may come to the same conclusion that I did. It's a very logical book and easy to read. The second thing we're going to talk about, or that I reference in my book, is another book that deals with epigenetics. It deals with, it's based in science. There's documented science information, which is essentially that what we think and what we feel affects the expression of a cell. The expression of a cell is the work it does. So you are influencing your cells either in a healthy way by what you think and feel, or in a non-healthy way, making it ill by what you think and feel. And this is a slow process and it happens over time. But this is a mechanism that we attract illnesses into our body by what we think. We think with electrical impulses in our brain. We feel with magnetic impulses in our nervous system. And this affects the expression of our cells. So that's the other thing. Now we're talking about consciousness. Now we're talking about what we think and what we feel. The next thing we talk about is neuroplasty. So neuroplasticity. So that is.
Do you mind if I just want to pause just 1 second, right? I know. So we're talking a little bit about epigenetics and talking electricity. We're talking magnets. Sounds like you're telling me that I can switch things on and off. Like almost just like an electric circuit, right? I can turn this through epigenetics, I can turn something on or off that's going to make me healthy or not. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
It's not quite as simple as that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about it. But what you think and feel will attract to you what you're thinking and feeling.
Okay. And
like I said, it happens slowly over time. So let's explore this a little bit more. We'll come back to it. So the next thing that I talk about in the book is around neuroplasticity. And that really is the ability for the brain to build new brain cells and rewire. And this is, again, based in science and discovered in 1960. It used to be that science thought the brain was fixed and it died as we got older. So it started to shrink and you had less cells. It is now a recognized fact that the brain can change. You can rewire how things are your neural pathways in your brain, and you can build new brain cells. And again, these are some easy read books. They're great information with some good examples of how people with brain injuries and the experiments that they've done or the processes that they've used to actually repair those brain injuries. And then what happens in the brain.
So I'm not stuck like this.
You're not stuck. No, you're not stuck.
This can be fixed.
It can be fixed. It can be fixed. So, as you follow this process, what you do is you start to build this new concept of consciousness and how consciousness affects our bodies and our minds. And then I share a near-death experience. This is a woman. So she's written a book, and it's a woman that was riddled with cancer. She suffered for 4 years with this aggressive cancer, and she was down to 75 pounds. She couldn't lift up her head. She was riddled with tumors and lesions throughout her whole torso up to her head. And there were open weeping wounds with toxins. She fell into a coma. They rushed her to the hospital, and the admitting physicians told her husband she wouldn't make it through the night. About 24 hours later, she woke up and declared she was going to be totally fine. And within 2 weeks, they couldn't find a trace of cancer in her body. And they kept her in the hospital doing more tests till finally she protested because she knew she was going to be fine. She knew the cancer was gone. So this is all, again, medically documented information. The medical profession cannot describe it or explain it away. But, and she's been a subject of, some intense studies by various physicians around the world. And she's not the only person that's had this kind of a thing, but she's documented it in a book.
Yeah, I mean, when they can't find an answer for something like this is generally when we call it spontaneous remission. Yes. Right. And then we've got nowhere else to go with it then. We just say, oh, that was spontaneous remission. Oh, cool. That's what that was. Where can I get some? I need a glass of that.
Yeah, exactly. And we don't know why, but it just happened and that's the way it is. And, others call it a miracle. So,
what do you call it, Neil?
Well, geez, that's a tough one. It is, from our human perspective, a miracle. But in my book, I'm going to share with you information that will enable you to see it as almost a birthright if you understand the concepts of consciousness and how we use it moment by moment to create our every experience in our life.
Real quick, consciousness, I'm still not, you've mentioned it in a couple different ways. Is it something we have? Is it something we share? Is it individual? Is it inside of us, outside of us? Just help me out with that.
Okay. So, in brief, we believe, or many of us believe, that we are matter imbued with consciousness. And if you speak to a lot of physicians or a lot of scientists, they will say consciousness is in the brain. Brain dies, consciousness gone. By the way, let me back up just a minute before I answer that, because I want to go back to this woman that had the NDE. So in that 24-hour period, she describes what she experienced. And so I'll tell you a few things that she came back with in terms of messages and what she experienced. And this really is a key reading that I recommend people read. And so what she described was that when she was in this coma and she was in a crash situation, they were trying to keep her alive. She said she was looking at herself and saying, hey, look, I've never felt better in my life. And all the people around are rushing and, doing all kinds of medical procedures trying to keep her alive. And she felt that she was expanding to everything in the universe. So be it a rock or an animal or a plant or a planet, she felt like she was becoming part of everything. And every time she was drawn back to her body, she would expand to be bigger. And she said that she could, she knew exactly what was going on. She was observing her body, but she could simultaneously observe conversations that were happening 40 feet away down a hall outside of another room. And she could understand those conversations. she, the other things that she came back with is that, and she met her father who died 10 years earlier. So this is part of this conversation that she had, or part of this story that she tells. But she came back with some fundamental things. She said, we come from love and we return to love. We are all unified after we die. Our consciousness is a part of everything. So she came back with messages like that. So now, to answer your question, most people believe, and she puts this in her book, is that we are matter imbued with consciousness. And the reality is that we are consciousness made visible through the descent of vibrational frequency of electrical particles. And I can see that you're trying to get your head around that.
Well, just, layman's terms, right? It's just real similar to saying, we're not human we're not physical beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a physical experience.
That's true.
I mean, but the electrical piece, I'm going to get that back to you and see if we can try that again, just in a layman's terms, right? What are you saying? Like, this is like, we're like condensation, except different.
No. So let me, so let's describe this a little bit more. So after we stretch people's consciousness, I take them to understand, and I use some excerpts in my book. And all of this material that I read, by the way, this blueprint information doesn't come from me. I'm merely the messenger. My wife would say tool, really, but I'm really the messenger.
That's what a wife does want to do, right?
So, jokingly, of course. So I share this information, and I've collected all of this information, and I've made this compendium of blueprint material that after people read A Higher Road, that if they choose to embark on the 7 steps, they can request this information. So my recommended way to read my book is read it from cover to cover, understand the process in its entirety. And if you then at that point decide, I'd like to do these 7 steps, then go back and start with either some of the science books or directly with step 1. And then when you get to the point where this blueprint information is important, just reach out. You can do that through my website, and I will send you a PDF of all of this information. So this process is all laid out inside my book. So I share this information with people, and the reason that I'm not telling you what the information is, I'm going to give you some excerpt, or I'll give you some insights into it. But I'm not telling you what it is because the way it is presented and branded would make most people run. I was desperate, and I was at the end of my rope, and I was about to commit suicide. I was open for anything that could work. And I had read all kinds of spiritual books, in the 90s, and then again in 2012, 2013, 2014. I was trying to find new books in spirituality that I could follow a process to change how I thought and to change how I was experiencing life. And I couldn't find one that worked for me. They're all good stuff, all good processes. I just couldn't make them work for me.
You didn't have a trigger point where it sounds like the trigger point for you was what was written in this NDE, and it all kind of coalesced for you, and then you were able to kind of like something fell into place, right? There was like, if we're gears, right? And remember, nobody drives stick too often these days, but like sometimes that gear would clunk into place, and then it would all just work, right? And you'd be like, why was that so hard? But it would clunk into place, and then there's like, that's why they've got the transmission of the power, right? Like, you have this transmission, and everything just kind of fell into place for you. But it wasn't until you were able to read this book, and it wasn't until you, for some reason, I keep thinking of Janis Joplin's, freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. You had nothing left to lose. You were at the point where you were willing to take anything and you found the thing, right? You said, all right, look, I got nothing left. There's nothing else here for me. But I'll accept, like, it just, just give me a sign. It's like, just give me a sign, anything, right? Anything that makes sense right here, anything that could trigger me. And that's what it sounds like. You had this trigger point and it all coalesced. And within that, coalescing, like you had a connection, you had the epiphany, as it were.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And, so this was this process I went through of, this is why I share these various scientific books as well. And these are easy to understand. This isn't, mathematician or engineering math that we're talking about here. We're talking about concepts of science that everybody will understand. For example, we all know today from science that at a subatomic level, we are all just energy. There's more space in what we think as something as solid, like our bodies or a rock, than there is solid form. The thing with that is that it hasn't really crept into our consciousness about that really means. We think about it intellectually, but the truth of what that means, we haven't really digested.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like a mind-blowing thing, right? Like even then, it's more of a warp than a mind-blowing, because it's kind of stuck. It's kind of stuck in there. I get it conceptually. I'm mostly air, but then why can't I stick my finger through myself, right? Like, why doesn't this work?
Yeah.
And you know what? Just to backtrack one quick second, you joked about being called a tool, but there's also that shaman piece, that we're hollow bones, right? Like, this is spirit consciousness that fills us up. And in that sense, yeah, we are tools. We're tools of the divine.
Yes. Well, and let's address that a little bit here in a moment. So we'll go back to, your question was really around trying to get your concept of this electromagnetism.
Yeah, back to the epigenetics and triggering and being able to switch them on and off,
and be able to switch them on and off, right? So, so I'm just going to bridge back to this NDE for the moment. So I was at this place, as you mentioned, that I was at the end of my rope, and you quoted Janis Joplin, which is a great song. And so one thing that this woman came back from the NDE was saying, we are not judged after we die. After death of our bodies, we are not judged. So no matter what you do here, you are not judged. And I had this, even though I'm agnostic and grew up agnostic, not religious in any way. I had this nagging Christian doubt that if I committed suicide, I'd go to hell. And, that was kind of preventing me from doing that last act. But I tell you, I was at the end, so I was ready to do it. So I was planning it out. But this one thing that this woman talks about is that we're not judged after death. And her concept of things, I couldn't really understand it, but I believed it because she experienced it. And the one thing she said, we weren't judged. So then I felt I now have permission to commit suicide. I'm at the end of my rope. I don't want to go on anymore. I'm going to commit suicide. So I came across this information, read this information, changed my life. So let's talk a little bit about science then in terms of making this bridge. At this subatomic level, we're all just energy. There's nothing solid under the sun. And then, the only difference between a rock and a loaf of bread is the density of electrical particles that are in the elements or in it, and the rate of vibration. If you could change the density of the electrical particles in a rock and change the vibration of those electrical particles, you could change it into a loaf of bread. So we know this from science. We don't know how to do it. We wouldn't even probably imagine how we could do it, but theoretically we could do it. So now I'm going to talk about now things that you will learn here. So I'm going to use three terms. I'm going to use universal consciousness, divine consciousness, and human consciousness. And so universal consciousness is what many would call God, or the Tao, or Yahweh, or Allah. And the information that I'm sharing, by the way, transcends all religions in the world. So, this is what universal consciousness. So universal consciousness was the only thing that existed before the Big Bang. And it is essentially in silence and stillness in space. And for those who think about space, it is not only the space around us or space outside of our planet. It is, for those who think in terms of atoms, you would say it's the space in the atom. So no matter how science probes space, because it is in silence and stillness and equilibrium, they will never be able to detect what it is. They will never understand. Science on its own will never be able to measure, observe, calculate what was before the Big Bang. They can speculate, but they'll never be able to calculate it. But universal consciousness is comprised of two primary impulses. And it's in this absolute silence and stillness and in equilibrium. And these two impulses are locked in an embrace of opposing energies. So one is the will to move out and create, and the other is the purpose to form bonds and experience itself. So at the time of the Big Bang, these primary impulses were split apart. And they are the link to what we see them, those respective tools are seen as electromagnetism. Electricity is a consciousness plan that moves out. It has movement. It is waves. The purpose to experience itself is seen as magnetism, and it has two faces, bonding and rejection. So bond with everything, attraction, repulsion. So essentially bond things together or push them apart. And you know about this if you played with magnets. Two magnets together, they either attract and they click, or they push each other apart.
I mean, I think that, like, growing up as a kid, right, especially as boys, I mean, magnets, right? How magical were they?
And still are.
Absolutely. 100%. Go ahead.
Yeah. So science, materialistic science, just believes they cannot describe where electromagnetism came from. They just say it is, and it was released at the time of the Big Bang. So if you follow this process, and I'm just giving you little glimpses, you have to actually read this and understand it and ponder it to really understand it. So I'm just giving you a couple of glimpses of what this information is like to make this link. So these impulses were torn apart and they form divine consciousness. So divine consciousness is forever destined to work in the material realm. It is either in silence and stillness in consciousness, or it is in activity through electromagnetism, and that electrical descent of particles is what gives human form to taste and touch, what we think and feel and what we see. Your soul is a fragment of divine consciousness, is unified in divine consciousnness, and it is through the descent of these electrical particles that materialized human form is given. So at the time of conception, the expression of egoic mind, the little I of the egoic mind came into being at the time of conception. And that is the ego, which can only work through the mechanisms of electromagnetism to attract to you what you like or reject what you don't like. So the ego only has two ways to make you happy: to make you feel safe and secure, and to make you happy, it bonds with everything that it likes. I like ice cream. I like that car. I like that house. I like to go on that trip. I like that person. I like that event. Or to reject the things that you don't like. I don't like that person. I don't like that kind of food. I don't want to go to that part of the world. I don't like that color of people. And those are the only mechanisms that the ego uses to create your experiences. So as you think with electrical impulses in your brain, that's a consciousness plan. As you feel with magnetic impulses in your nervous system, this creates a blueprint of consciousness. Your human consciousness is all around you. You talk about auras of people in different colors and stuff like that. So your human consciousness lies around you, and when it's kind of dormant, it's like waste just around you. But when you are thinking of something, you're starting to create this blueprint. And when you feel, whether it's a negative emotion, like I don't like, I hate, or I love, the universe does not distinguish between I want that or I don't want that. It is an act of magnetism that bonds to it like things. So as you create this blueprint, and the more you think about it and the more feeling you give it, you magnetize this blueprint to bring an like experience into your awareness.
Can I pause you there for a sec? Let me just pause. Yeah. One sec. So when you're talking blueprint, is that similar to like transmission, right? We're transmitting. So is blueprint synonymous with transmission in this? Like the way we keep sending out like rejection or attraction?
Yeah.
And then I guess to take it further, right? When we do something with feeling, that's like putting an impression. That's like a stamping something almost. Would you say that's true?
Well, so if you think about, you think with these electrical impulses in the brain, this is a consciousness plan. So I want to move out and I want to create this thing, this experience. And it might be, I use this in my book. I attracted to myself unknowingly, unwittingly, didn't know how I did this, didn't even intend to do this, but I attracted to myself a brand new $60,000 Lexus for a $100 lottery ticket. I explain this in my book. I took that as, wow, wasn't I lucky? But now that I actually understand what I understand, I know exactly what I did, and I describe this in my book of exactly how I did it and why that Lexus came into my life. And we do this with everything in our lives. Every experience that comes into our life, everything we like or merely endure, we have attracted it. And the reason we've attracted it is because your soul is here on a journey. Your soul is here to learn the lessons that it needs to learn and to experience the things it needs to learn in order to grow spiritually. And so lifetime after lifetime, you come in, your soul comes in, and it comes in, you'll be, you'll have different places of origin. You'll come with different colors of skin. Some lifetimes you'll be wealthy. Sometimes lifetimes you'll be poor. Some lifetimes you'll be a beggar. Some lifetimes you'll be male. Sometimes lifetimes you'll be female. You'll have these different colors of skin. You'll come from different places. And all of that, there's this thin thread of a soul's journey that it is learning. And it's only through lessons of suffering does the journeying soul gain self-knowledge to retain individuality after it discards the ego. So this whole process of electromagnetism and this small I egoic mind is to split divine consciousness into these fragments to create multiple experiences. When you die and you finally transcended your ego, not necessarily in this lifetime, you might have 100, I don't know how many lifetimes you'll have. I don't know how many I had or have had or will continue to have. But until your soul wakes up to the fact that this is what I'm doing to myself through these mechanisms of the ego, and starts to go through a process to transcend your ego, you will continue to be reincarnated. You are here. We are here not to please God. We are here to express God. We come from love. We return to love. And what we need to do while we're here is learn how to express love to everything and everyone in our environment.
Yeah, Neil, I'm in, right? I'm all in. The one question, so it sounds a little bit, like the idea of samsara, right? I think I'm getting the right word. I don't know all my Hindu words, but like, the idea is that it's what you're saying, right? We've got to we repeat this cycle until we get it right, right? Even, Groundhog Day, right? We get it right until we get to date Andy McDowell in the end, right? Because we come back, and each time and every time we come back, we learn a little bit more in the previous day, right? We say, all right, I know what this is going to be like. This time I think I got it right, right? And you come back and we get in here and, in your case, Neil, you're like, shit, why am I depressed? Why am I going through all this? And I'm ready to end this. And then trigger recognition of the truth of who you are. And like, why did it take so long? I guess would be another question, right? Why for you did it strike later? And is it possible that we can have this epiphany, and can we learn this sooner?
So this is an individual thing, and I couldn't comment one way or the other when somebody's going to, follow this process. At some point in some lifetime, you will begin the process of transcending your ego. And I don't know how many lifetimes that may take, but I can tell you that I share a process that I learned in a higher road, and I share it in a higher road. I mean, that if you read it and you can understand it, I give you all of the knowledge that you need and all of the tools in the process that you need to start this process now. And it's entirely up to you. You read my book and decide this is not for you, not a problem. Just please pass the book on to somebody else without any colorful commentary, and and just make a suggestion that, hey, I think you might be interested in reading this book, because you can never again accurately judge the inner reality of another person. And so what didn't land for you or doesn't make sense for you might make sense to a loved one, might make sense to a friend, might make sense to a colleague. You never know.
Well, Neil, even for yourself, right? You went through the 90s reading all the self-help books. You went through some, in the 2010s or whatever, going through reading a whole bunch of these self-help books. And again, it wasn't until you read this NDE book, and I got to imagine that now you might be able to go back through some of these other books and be like, well, there it was. It was right there. There it was. It was right there. So, I mean, and I only say this to say that just because somebody doesn't get it today, if they read your book, maybe, yes, I absolutely agree with pass it on. But maybe read it later in life, right? Maybe read it again a second time after you've had some different experiences. I know that myself, for example, look, look, I'm going to show you what I got for Christmas real quick. I got a bunch of tuning forks and freaking crystals. All right. Guess what? There's no way I could have guessed that was going to show up in my house this year, in the past year, because my thoughts and feelings on these things changed. A year and a half ago, I probably would have made fun of this stuff, right? Like, why would I do that? Right? It doesn't make any sense. Now I'm like, I need all your crystals and your tuning forks, right? And the same thing I'm saying, I actually had a book that I bought over a year and a half ago that led me to this, but I wasn't ready then, a year and a half ago, right? I read it this year and this past year, and I was like, I needed all this now, right? So I always say that to the person who does read your book, who may not get it right now, because just for my audience, and I'm not saying I've got the best bullshit meter out of anybody else out there, but sounds like you're dead on. Sounds like through my own research, through my own experiences, that you felt this process, and you've gotten yourself to a place, and you understand. And through your ability to engineer, right, to construct things in a logical sense and lay it out for somebody else, to your point, like a blueprint, and giving them a path reconstructed over how you saw yours forming. I think that's extremely valuable, and I think that people should be checking it out.
Yeah, no, and if I can add to that, then in the memoir section of my book, which is the front section, I use my life story as an illustration for how I utilized all of my thinking and feeling that created all of these experiences in my life. And I give pretty candid examples of that. I haven't done that because I wanted to share all this personal stuff. I did it because I think it's important for people to be able to read something, look at it, and understand. So when they finish my book, if they went back to my memoir, they would understand, oh, now I understand these linkages, and that might be able to help them with their own journey. And that's the reason I put the memoir in. So same thing. And I would agree that if you read a book today, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, it might make more sense to you than, or it might land with you where it didn't land with you initially. Absolutely.
I get it. No, get it. And I think that sharing the personal story is definitely valuable. Again, that's why we do this podcast the way that we do, right? It's different people, similar experiences, but different ways we tell this story, right? Here's how my journey went. Here's where we all are, I feel, in a similar space, right? Well, we're all Buddhas except for, it's one's recognition of that space, right? So once you recognize that, it's whatever, you get to a point, but we all get there differently, right? There's the idea of, be grateful for the group that you have, your community, and the people that are on the way, right? And I think that that's what your story's for in of itself. So Neil, if you don't mind, unless there's something else that we really want to get to, there's a little section I like to get to that is kind of like spiritual speed dating, right? I mean, somebody's tuning into this show to listen to you, Neil, to see whether or not like it's a good match, right? This is a speed dating show, and so I got a couple questions that I'd like to ask. You good for that?
I am good for that. And you're cutting out every now and then, so you kind of go blank and I'm not hearing you. So just so you know. So that's why I did the little pause with my hand and stuff.
Okay. All right. Yeah. God, I hope that, now I'm all like, which mic is this? It should be the right one. So we'll see.
I think it's an internet thing.
All right. Well, let's hope that it makes it all the way through. So Neil, if you're all set, then here we go. We'll do, I think it's a good one for you. Spiritual Bachelor number 1. What is, describe heaven and how to get there.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Describe heaven and how to get there.
Well, heaven is unconditional love. And how to get there is if you follow the 7 steps in my higher road, you can learn the process that can free you from your current situation and get you there while you are still here in materialized form.
I like it. So this one, love to get your insight because you experienced, your severe depression. Why are so many people, would you say, depressed?
It goes back to consciousness and what we think about, what we feed our mind, and we do this involuntarily, ignorantly, and unknowingly. And the things that we think about and reinforce through our TV watching and what we read and who we interact with and how we interact just reinforces these blueprints, and they keep drawing these negative, what we consider to be negative experiences into our life. But love dons many masks in its loving attempt to help the soul wake up to the fact that this is the kind of stuff that it's doing to itself.
Yeah, so it's like a kind of like a never replication, right? Of what we continue to, again, internally replicate, reinforce, replicate it, reinforce it, replicate, kind of a vicious cycle. And it's not until I think, one thing we didn't touch on was how, you spend a large time meditating, right? You got into the meditation, and it was through that year of meditation that you look back and you were able to process these thoughts and see them in a different and new light. And one of those pieces, my guess is, there's the I heard you say the non-judgmental piece. And then there's just being able to kind of let go of some of these things and have a new experience.
Yeah. So, on that, if we can just take a moment in brief terms. So I now meditate for 90 minutes to 2 hours every morning when I get up. And even though I tried to do this in the 90s and meditate, I never really understood the true purpose of meditation. And I know people will have lots of reasons about why to meditate. Oh, it makes you calmer and, a bunch of things. But I can tell you, from my perspective, the true purpose of meditation is to make connection with the divine. And when you learn the process to do this, at some point, what happens is you build new brain cells at the top of your head, and you'll start to feel an opening. You won't know what that is. At least I didn't. But that opening begins to grow, and you'll understand that that's what's going on. And that opening is a connection between you and the divine. And when you have the right process and understand the reason to meditate and then how to meditate, and it takes practice to do this, you need to empty your mind of all thoughts and all thinking, and you need to get into a space of silence and stillness. The vibrational frequency of the divine is so heightened and so high that until you are in a receptive state to receive it, you will not receive it. You are being showered with unconditional love every moment of your existence, but your vibrational frequency is so low through this egoic process that you can't feel it or recognize it. And over time, I'll tell you, a year after I had these 2 meditations within 3 days of each other, they were just, I didn't care what happened to my body. I didn't care whether it was ill, what pain it had. I was just in this state of pure, unconditional love, just bathed in unconditional love. And no matter what I did in the past or what I was feeling, it just didn't matter. I just wanted to stay in that state forever. And that, I think, is a glimpse of the state that you will experience when you pass on from this lifetime.
Yeah, I love it. Right, the idea of we are not the body, right? You are not the body, and just kind of being able to, what do they call that, samadhi state, right? In Hinduism, again, right? Like in meditation. And also, I think it gives us the idea of, I love the illustration of kind of connecting on the top there. To me, that brings to mind the lotus flower, right? The blossom, like it just opens up on the top there, and then it's just kind of, there it is. So Neil, thanks, man. I think this was a great one. I'll have to take some time with the book and sit down and read it. Sounds interesting. I love, a process is always nice to have, right? And it's also nice to have, I think that you had mentioned on another podcast, if you don't have somebody that you can talk to about this, right? And you've tuned into this podcast and you resonate with Neil, then you should go check out his book, because it can be hard, right? If you're already feeling the tinges of an awakening, and you want to know how you harness it and what are some of the next steps. To me, Neil, it sounds like you've written that out, and you've given some people an idea of, hey, you're not losing your mind. This is kind of what's happening with you, for you, and you're actually in a pretty awesome space. So Neil, again, thank you for hopping on today. Where can people go find the book, and where can people find out more about Neil Elliott?
So you can learn more about me and the book on my website, which is dneilelliott.com. So it's DNEILELLIOTT.com. The book, A Higher Road, is available on Amazon in hardcover, paperback, or ebook. It's also available, through Chapters or Barnes & Noble, through your local bookstores, in either your favorite ebook form or via hardcover or paperback.
Awesome, Neil. Thanks again for being on today.
Really hope you enjoyed this episode of the Spiritual Dope Podcast. Stay connected with us directly through spiritualdope.co. You can also join the discussion on Facebook, Spiritual Dope, and Instagram at spiritual_dope. If you would like to speak with us, send us an email through brandon@spiritualdope.co. And as always, thank you for cultivating your mindset and creating a better reality. This concludes the most thought-provoking part of your day. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay fully up to date. Until next time, be kind to yourself and trust your intuition.